The canine dog didn't bark out of fear. He barked because of memory. At a small airport in Nebraska, a pregnant woman had just stepped into the terminal when a working dog named Ranger suddenly reacted. But it wasn't the scent of explosives or drugs that set him off. It was something he recognized from the past, a name that was supposed to be lost to war, a secret buried for nearly 2 decades, and a young woman who had no idea that she was the key to it all. If you're drawn to emotional, unexpected, and deeply human stories like this, make sure to subscribe to Dog Stories. Here, every video is a journey, not just about dogs, but about loyalty, loss, and how the truth always finds its way back. In today's story, it might just make you see canine dogs in a whole new light. Early morning at Rock Hill Airport, Nebraska, seemed uneventful, until Ranger stopped in his tracks. This German Shepherd, trained as a canine, had served nearly 7 years. But today, something was off. His eyes locked onto a single point in the crowd, as if sensing something beyond human perception. Sergeant Cole Waverly had just taken a sip of black coffee, the bitterness barely touching his tongue when his wrist froze. Ranger gave a small tug on the leash, then stood completely still. Ears up, back tense. No growl, no sudden outburst, just a strange, silent tension hanging heavy in the air. Cole followed Ranger's gaze. In the stream of people passing through the security scanners, there was a young woman, tall, blonde, wearing a dark blue coat over a plain white blouse. She carried 2 paper bags, and the curve of her belly was unmistakable. She was pregnant, probably 8 months along. Elena Reigns. That was the name printed on the boarding pass she handed to security. But what caught Cole's attention wasn't the paperwork, it was her eyes. She wore sunglasses far too dark for an indoor space. Her face was nearly expressionless, like someone who had trained themselves to stay calm in every situation. A kind of calm that didn't feel natural. Ranger let out a low whine in his throat, then started barking. Not loud, not panicked, but short, sharp, and deliberate. A sound he'd only been trained to use when there was a real threat. Cole tightened his grip on the leash. Ranger, back. But the dog didn't move. A few passengers turned their heads. Some stepped back. Elena kept walking, but slower now. She didn't avert her face. In fact, through the dark sunglasses, it seemed like her eyes were locked on Ranger. Not with fear, not with confusion, but with something closer to recognition. Ma'am, please stop there, Cole called out, stepping forward. His voice wasn't aggressive, but firm, the tone of someone who's handled hundreds of situations, yet knew this one was unlike any of them. Elena stopped, then collapsed right in front of him. The sound of her body hitting the tile floor echoed like a thunderclap through the terminal, freezing everyone around her. The paper bags flew from her hands, spilling a few documents, a small bottle, a stuffed bear, and a brown envelope. Cole dropped to her side instantly. Ranger was still barking, but now it was urgent, sharp, persistent, like he was warning someone that hadn't yet stepped into view. Elena? Cole didn't know her, but instinct made him call her name. Her eyes were shut tight, lips pale from exhaustion. An airport nurse rushed over, radioing for medical personnel. Ranger stood right beside her, unmoving, no longer barking, just breathing heavily. Every so often he licked her hand, as if trying to wake her up. Then Cole's eyes fell on the envelope that had slipped out. Partially open, the handwriting on the front was messy, but unmistakable. Forgive me. He froze. Her hand was still loosely gripping something, a silver chain with a military dog tag. Cole gently pried her fingers open. The tag was old, worn by time, but the name stamped into it hit him like a punch to the chest. Brandt L. There was no mistaking it. Lucas Brandt, his old teammate, the one who died during a classified mission 18 years ago. The very first handler Ranger ever had. And now this woman was holding his dog tag, collapsing right in front of Ranger, as if fate had chosen this exact moment to reconnect threads long broken. Cole had seen a lot in his years of service, but the look Elena gave Ranger just before she lost consciousness, like she knew him from someone else's memory, shook something in him that no amount of logic, training, or reason could explain. Something shifted at Rock Hill this morning. Something only a dog could sense. Because no matter how deeply a memory is buried, a dog never forgets. Cole Waverly wasn't someone who rattled easily. 12 years in airport security, 8 years in the military before that, and 3 overseas deployments had forged a kind of steadiness no one could fake or buy. But this morning, standing in the crowded corridor of Rock Hill Airport, clutching an old silver dog tag, Cole's hand trembled slightly. Brant L. The name etched into the metal seemed to carry its own weight, dragging his chest and his memories into a kind of black hole he'd spent nearly 2 decades avoiding. Lucas Brant. A teammate, a friend, a man who died so others could live. Cole tightened his grip around the tag. The edge bit lightly into his skin, as if to remind him. This pain never really left. He looked at Ranger, the German shepherd lying close beside the woman now strapped to a stretcher. Even with paramedics on the scene, Ranger hadn't moved. He wasn't just a canine on duty, he was guarding a memory Cole had never been ready to confront. "You knew, didn't you?" Cole muttered. Ranger didn't respond. He simply gave the back of Elena's hand a gentle lick. Instinctive, soft, as if the wound wasn't on her skin, but somewhere deeper. Over 18 years ago, at a small outpost near the outskirts of Baghdad, Lucas and Cole had once shared a foxhole, laughing through the sound of gunfire. Lucas used to joke, "If I go first, don't let them forget me. Soldiers die, dogs remember." Cole never imagined that line would haunt him, even now. Lucas had trained Ranger since he was just a pup. 2 soldiers, one on 2 legs, one on 4, so bonded that with a single whistle, Ranger would abandon a full meal just to run back to his handler. Until the day everything changed. A mission Lucas was assigned to carry out alone. No radio check-ins, no return. All they found was a blood-stained uniform and a short letter tucked into his pocket. His body was never recovered. Cole had kept Ranger ever since, maybe as a way to keep a part of Lucas close. But the dog, he never forgot. And this morning, Ranger had sensed something long before Cole ever could. Inside airport security, Elena now lay on a fold-out cot, an oxygen tube under her nose, and a vitals monitor beeping softly beside her. Doctors said it was a stress-induced blood pressure drop, not life-threatening, but she needed rest. Cole stood a few feet away, the dog tag still in his pocket. Ranger sat right beside her, eyes locked on her pale face, tail thumping softly against the floor, not out of excitement, but like he was standing watch. "Do you know who I am?" The question slipped out like a breath. Elena had woken up at some point. Cole hadn't noticed. Her voice wasn't clearly afraid, maybe just tired. So tired that emotion had no room to surface. Cole nodded slowly. "I know that name," he said, pulling the dog tag from his pocket. "Lucas Brant. He was my friend, and this dog used to be his." Elena looked at Ranger, eyes welling up. "I never knew my father. My mom never talked about him. She only said he was a soldier. It wasn't until a few weeks ago, after she passed, that I found the box. There was a letter, this chain, and a name." Cole studied her for a long moment, then asked, "Why did you come here, Elena?" She stayed quiet for a few seconds, like she was carefully choosing her words. "I'm not sure," she whispered. "But the letter, it said that if anything ever happened, I needed to find someone named Waverly. And if I did, maybe I'd finally understand why my father never really disappeared." Cole felt a tightness in his chest, like someone had reached in and clenched his heart. He'd never received a letter from Lucas, at least he thought he hadn't. But now, sitting in front of him was someone carrying Brant's blood. And somehow, Ranger had recognized her first. "You still have the letter?" he asked. Elena gave a faint nod. "It's in my bag, along with the little bear I never had the heart to throw away." Cole turned to pick up the crumpled paper bag she'd brought with her, creased and spotted with moisture. Inside, along with a few personal items, was an envelope yellowed with age. His hand trembled slightly as he stared at the messy handwriting across the front. "If she found you, it means I'm gone. And it's time the truth stopped being buried beneath the sand." Lucas. No one else wrote like that. For the first time in years, Cole felt the past he'd buried clawing its way back to the surface, not for revenge, but maybe to finally find its ending. And Ranger? He was still sitting there, as if, after all these years, he'd just recovered a piece of his soul that war had once stolen. Cole Waverly wasn't someone who rattled easily. 12 years in airport security, 8 years in the military before that, and 3 tours overseas had forged a kind of steel no one could buy. But this morning, in the packed hallway of Rock Hill Airport, clutching an old silver dog tag, Cole's hand trembled. Brant L. The name etched into the metal seemed to carry its own weight. It dragged Cole's memories and his chest into a kind of black hole he'd spent nearly 2 decades avoiding. Lucas Brandt, a teammate, a friend, a man who died so that others could live. Cole clenched the dog tag tighter, the edge cutting lightly into his skin, as if to remind him, this pain never really left. He looked at Ranger, the German shepherd lying close beside the woman on the stretcher. Even with medics on scene, Ranger hadn't moved. He wasn't just a working dog. He was guarding a memory Cole had never been ready to face. "You knew, didn't you?" Cole muttered. Ranger didn't respond. He simply gave the back of Elena's hand a gentle lick, instinctive, soft like the wound wasn't on her skin, but somewhere deeper. Over 18 years ago, at a small outpost on the outskirts of Baghdad, Lucas and Cole once shared a foxhole, laughing through gunfire like it was just another day. Lucas used to joke, "If I go first, don't let them forget me. Soldiers die, dogs remember." Cole never thought that line would haunt him all these years later. Lucas had trained Ranger from the time he was a pup. 2 soldiers, one human, one on 4 legs, bonded so deeply that with just a whistle, Ranger would leave a full meal behind to run to his handler. Until that one fateful day, a mission Lucas was sent on alone. No check-ins, no return. All they ever found was a bloodied uniform and a short letter in his pocket. His body was never recovered. Cole had kept Ranger ever since, maybe as a way to keep Lucas close. But the dog? He never forgot. And this morning, Ranger had sensed something, long before Cole ever could. In the security office, Elena lay on a fold-out cot, an oxygen tube under her nose and a vitals monitor softly beeping beside her. Doctors said it was a drop in blood pressure brought on by stress, not dangerous, but she needed rest. Cole stood a few steps away, the dog tag still in his pocket. Ranger sat right beside Elena, eyes fixed on her pale face, his tail tapping gently against the floor, not excited, but watchful, like he was standing guard. "Do you know who I am?" The question came out like a whisper. Elena had woken up at some point, though Cole hadn't noticed. Her voice didn't sound afraid, maybe just tired, so tired that nothing was left to feel. Cole nodded slowly. "I know the name," he said, pulling the tag from his pocket. "Lucas Brandt. He was my friend, and this dog used to be his." Elena looked at Ranger, eyes beginning to fill. I never knew my father. My mom never talked about him. All she said was that he was a soldier. It wasn't until a few weeks ago after she passed that I found the box, a letter, this chain, and a name." Cole looked at her for a long moment, then asked, "Why did you come here, Elena?" She was silent for a few seconds, like she was searching for the right words. "I'm not sure," she whispered. "But the letter said that if anything ever happened, I should find someone named Waverly. And if I did, maybe I'd understand why my father never really disappeared." Cole felt like something had clamped around his chest. He'd never received a letter from Lucas, or at least he thought he hadn't. But now, sitting right in front of him was someone carrying Brandt's blood. And Ranger, somehow, had recognized her first. "You still have the letter?" he asked. Elena nodded weakly. "It's in my bag, along with the little bear I could never bring myself to throw away." Cole turned back and picked up the paper bag she'd carried, now crumpled, stained with faint spots of moisture. Inside, along with a few personal items, was an envelope yellowed by time. He stared at the messy handwriting across the front, his hand trembling slightly. "If she's found you, it means I'm gone. And it's time the truth stopped being buried in the sand." Lucas? No one wrote like him. For the first time in years, Cole felt the past he'd buried clawing its way back to the surface. Not for revenge, but maybe to finally find a real ending. And Ranger? Ranger was still sitting there, as if he'd finally found a piece of his soul that the war had stolen long ago. Cole Waverly had read all kinds of letters in his life, reprimands, love notes, messages from the front lines, but never a letter from someone who was dead, and never one meant for him, delivered through a girl he'd never met, but who somehow carried the weight of his old friend's soul. He sat alone in the break room behind the airport clinic. The only sounds were the low hum of the AC above and the harsh fluorescent light shining down on the brown envelope in front of him. Ranger lay at his feet, not asleep, not watching, just there. As if he knew. They were about to hear a name they hadn't heard in years. Cole opened the envelope. Inside was a single page, yellowed with time. The handwriting was rushed, like it had been written under pressure, unsure there would be time to finish. There was no date at the top, only one line. If she came looking for you, it means I couldn't keep my promise. Cole swallowed hard. Cole, I don't know how this letter found its way to you. Maybe Lena gave it to you. Maybe it was the girl. Either way, thank you for still being there. I did something I wasn't supposed to do. I fell in love with someone in a war zone. Someone not in any file, not in any orders, not under any protection. I promised I'd get her out, but then everything changed. They found out. They started watching, and I chose to send the information out rather than let it die with me. Lena was pregnant. She didn't tell me right away, because she was scared, not of me, but of what the world would do to a child born between truth and lies. The girl, if she's standing in front of you now, may have never heard my voice. But I spoke to her every night, in journals, in letters Lena never had the courage to send. If she's made it to you, Cole, it means she's being watched. She's carrying something they thought was buried, and there's only one person I trust to help her. You. And Ranger. That dog will remember what we forget. Thank you for keeping him. Lucas Brandt. Cole set the letter down. His hands remained still, eyes fixed on the empty space in front of him, but his mind had already drifted back to that dust-covered place, to those days in the sand. Lucas had known, and Lucas had planned for this. Cole had never heard the name Lena while Lucas was alive, never seen a letter, never been told that Ranger had once carried anything besides orders. He lowered his head. Ranger looked up at him, then gently licked Cole's wrist, as if to say, I knew before you did. Elena woke for the second time, just as the afternoon light spilled through the frosted glass. She winced at a dull ache behind her eyes, her hands still loosely clutching the necklace. Ranger was still beside her, like a living statue that had never left her side. Cole stepped in. No clipboard, no questions. Just the truth. He placed the letter on the small table beside the bed. Elena looked at it, then looked at him. She didn't ask, "What is that?" She didn't ask, "Whose is it?" She only asked, "Did you know my father?" The words came out softly, but they cut straight through a part of Cole's memory he'd never let anyone touch. He nodded. No hesitation, no dodging. I fought alongside him, and I owe him more than I've ever said out loud. Elena looked into his eyes. Then? Why didn't I know anything? Not one photo, not one story, not a single word from my mother about him. Cole sat down beside her, his voice low. Because maybe, if she told you, you'd be pulled into it. And Lucas gave his life so you wouldn't have to live in that kind of shadow. Elena began to cry, not from pain, not from anger, but because something inside her had finally been confirmed. She wasn't lost anymore. She gripped the necklace tighter. Ranger let out a soft breath, then lifted his head and rested his chin gently on her lap. For a moment, Elena flinched. He used to own this dog, didn't he? Cole nodded. Ranger looks at me, like he knows me, like he's seen me somewhere before. Cole exhaled. I think he has. But through someone else, through your father. No one said anything after that. They didn't have to. The truth doesn't always need to be shouted. Sometimes, it just needs to be present. Like an old dog sitting quietly in the corner of a room, watching the person who just stepped into a world he's known for a very, very long time. Cole Waverly didn't sleep that night. Not because of work, not because of duty, but because of the way Ranger sat by the door. Silent, alert, like he was listening to something only he could hear. Elena slept, but not peacefully. She tossed and turned on the makeshift bed, a light sheen of sweat forming on her forehead. Ranger never took his eyes off her. Every time she gasped or shifted, he leaned in, waiting, or maybe ready. Around 3 a.m., Cole stood up to make some coffee when Ranger suddenly perked his ears. Without waiting for a command, he stepped toward the door, scratched at it lightly, then looked back at Cole as if to say, "Come with me." "Ranger?" Cole frowned. The dog never left his post, unless there was a reason. Ranger scratched the door again, then let out a low whine. Not a warning, but a nudge. "Hey, you forgot something." Cole glanced at Elena once more, still unconscious, then threw on his jacket, slung his bag over his shoulder, and nodded. "Lead the way, buddy." Over 2 hours later, they stood in front of an old, decommissioned military base, about 70 miles west of Rock Hill Airport. Cole hadn't been back here since Lucas's funeral. The iron gate was rusted now, overgrown with weeds. But Ranger didn't hesitate. He slipped under a gap in the broken fence and headed straight inside, like he'd never left. "You really remember this place?" Cole whispered, even though there was no one around to hear. In the stillness of the forest night, the sound of Ranger's claws tapping against the old concrete floor echoed like the ticking of time. He led Cole down a long hallway, took a left, then stopped in front of a rusted door, half closed, half open. Cole knew it instantly. Room 14B, Joint Ops Technical Bay, Lucas's old quarters. Though it had long been cleared out, long since abandoned by the military, the room still smelled the same. Dust, metal, and something else Ranger could never forget. The dog stepped in first, made a slow circle, then froze in the corner, right next to an old metal locker. He scratched at it lightly, then sat down and looked at Cole. Cole opened the locker. Inside were things that looked worthless at first glance. A torn stack of papers, a black and white photo, and a small leather notebook with a frayed strap. He pulled out the notebook and flipped it open. Lucas's handwriting appeared, quick, clipped. But this wasn't a journal. It was code, symbols, coordinates, notes from a soldier who trusted no one but himself. "You remember the smell of this book, don't you, Ranger?" Cole muttered. "All these years, and you still haven't forgotten?" Ranger didn't respond. Of course not. But the way he tilted his head, the way his eyes never left that notebook, told Cole everything he needed to know. There was something in that book, something Lucas had taught Ranger, but had never shared with anyone else. Back in the truck, Cole unfolded the photo under the dim cabin light. Lucas, nearly 20 years younger, stood beside a dark-haired woman with a familiar face, and a young Ranger, still just a pup. Behind them stretched a sandy road, likely a base somewhere overseas. That woman was none other than Lena, Elena's mother. Cole exhaled, his gaze heavy. Everything was coming back. What had once been buried in sand, in steel, and in silence was now coming alive again, through the eyes of a dog. "You've never been wrong," Cole whispered, gently stroking Ranger's head. "I just took too long to start listening." By the time they returned to Rock Hill, dawn was just breaking. Elena was awake, sitting by the window in the clinic with a blanket draped over her shoulders. She looked up as Ranger trotted into the room, eyes lighting up like she was seeing an old friend return from a long journey. "Did he find something?" she asked softly. Cole nodded and handed her the notebook. "Your father's history, not told in words, but left behind in the one place Ranger never forgot." Elena opened it, her hands trembling slightly. Ranger sat beside her, silent. Between the girl, the dog, and the memories, a truth was beginning to take shape. No courtroom needed. No DNA test required. Just loyalty. The kind of instinct time can't erase. Morning in Rock Hill wasn't loud, just sunlight spilling quietly through the scratched window of the clinic, and the steady, rhythmic breathing of Ranger, his chin resting on Elena's leg. But inside Cole's mind, there was nothing but noise, memories, questions, and that gnawing feeling that he was now in the middle of something far bigger than he'd ever imagined. Elena didn't speak at first. After reading nearly all of Lucas's notebook, she just sat there, her fingers tracing each page as if they could reach across time and touch her father's hand. Finally, she spoke, her voice hoarse, quiet, but steady. "I think I'm being watched." Cole looked up. So did Ranger. "Before I came here," she continued, "someone broke into my apartment. They didn't take anything, but they tore the place apart. They knew exactly where to look. The drawer with old photos, the bookshelf with the hidden latch, even the piano in the living room." She paused. "They didn't know. My mom once told me, if you ever feel like you're being watched, don't trust anyone, not even your own memories. Check inside the piano." Cole frowned. "The piano?" Elena nodded. "It's this old, out-of-tune thing. No one ever touches it." Inside the soundboard, she hid a small wooden box. "I found it 3 days after she died." "And you brought it with you?" "No," Elena said. "I packed it in my checked luggage. If someone was going to search me, I didn't want them to find it right away." Cole stood up. "Then we go get it. No going home. No police stations. Too easy to trace." They sat inside Cole's pickup truck as Elena opened the box, resting it gently on her lap like it might shatter if she breathed too hard. Ranger sat in the back seat, eyes locked on her movements, as if he could already sense what was coming. The box had no lock, just a dark, weathered wood with a small crack along the bottom edge. Inside they found a folded, yellowed letter. A desert map marked in red around a single set of coordinates. A stack of black and white photographs, mostly of soldiers, base camps, and a few women in local clothing. And a cassette tape. Elena held the cassette like it was the final piece of a puzzle she never knew she was solving. "I don't have a tape player," she said, then looked at Cole. "But I know my mom did, at her old cabin. Up in Sandridge Mountain." Cole nodded. "Then that's where we're going." The Sandridge cabin was tucked deep in a pine forest, far removed from anything modern. Lena had spent her final years there. No cell service, no internet, just wind, trees, and the kind of silence that made time feel irrelevant. The tape player was exactly where Elena remembered, in a drawer, untouched. She gently wiped off the cassette, slid it in, and hit play. The soft whir of the tape spinning sounded like a soul waking up after a long sleep. Then a voice, a woman's, unsteady but not afraid. "Lena." "Elena, if you're hearing this, it likely means I'm gone, and what I feared for so many years has come. There was something your father brought back from the war. Not a weapon, not documents, but a truth. A name, proof. And because of that, he couldn't return. I kept that secret to protect you. But if you're being followed now, it means they found the trail. The map you found in the box, that place is everything. It's the reason he disappeared. It's why I never dared to speak his name. You're not just carrying a child, Elena. You're carrying the past. You're carrying a choice. And if you're brave enough to open it, you'll see you're not the only one they're watching." The tape stopped. No click, no static, just silence. Cole let out a long breath, but Elena didn't move. She sat perfectly still, eyes fixed out the window, past the trees, toward whatever it was her father had left behind. "So she said, voice raspy, "am carrying two things they've tried to bury forever." Cole didn't ask, "Who are they?" He'd lived in that world, the world of nameless files, unsigned orders, and deaths that never came with explanations. And now he understood. Elena wasn't just a pregnant woman. She was the key to a secret sealed by blood, buried in silence, and guarded by loyalty. Ranger licked her hand, then gently rested his head on her stomach, where life was beginning to form. Not like a dog guarding his handler, but like an old friend, recognizing something Cole hadn't yet put into words. The second cassette had no label, just a worn tape wrapped in a thin cloth pouch. No writing, no note. Elena had found it wedged in the lining at the bottom of the box, as if her mother had hidden it intentionally, apart from everything else. "You sure you want to hear this?" Cole asked, eyes locked on the tape like it was a piece of evidence that would never make it to court. Elena nodded, not a hint of hesitation. Cole slid the tape into the player. The first hiss of static silenced the entire room. Then a voice, not Lena's, a man's, deep, steady, unshakable. "Lucas Brandt. My name is Lucas. If you're hearing this, I'm probably gone. Or worse, I was never allowed to come back. I didn't die in an ambush. I didn't disappear because of the enemy. I disappeared because my own side gave the order. I was deployed on op called Sandvale. Publicly, it was a hostage rescue mission. In reality, it was about retrieving data. We infiltrated a black site, off the maps, off the books. Inside, there was a server loaded with files tied to a program called Everlight. At first, I didn't care. Orders were orders, but then I saw the data, lists of names, photos, medical profiles of civilians, children, and Lena. Elena held her breath. Ranger didn't move a muscle at her feet, but Cole could feel it. The dog was listening. She wasn't just a translator like they told us. She was once a test subject. They had her in the system, then wiped her out after the program was deemed a failure. But she survived, and they didn't want anyone to know. I stole a copy of the data. I couldn't save the whole team, but I could protect her and the child. I knew they'd come. I knew there'd be no way back, but I still had Ranger, and I left something with him that I couldn't carry myself. Memory. The tape paused, then continued, this time with no words. Footsteps, metal clanking, a soft bark, then the heavy breathing of someone running. Elena turned to Cole. "Is this?" Cole nodded. "Audio from his final mission." At the end of the recording, Lucas's voice returned, calmer now. No more hesitation, no more fear. "If the girl finds you, Cole, don't tell her everything. Not unless she's ready. But if she's hearing this tape, then it's already begun again. They'll come back, and this time, they're not after the data. They want the one carrying it." Elena stood, pulling the cassette from the player. She didn't cry, She didn't shake. But something in her eyes had changed. It was no longer the gaze of someone searching for a father, but of someone who'd just learned that her father had died to protect life, not take it. He knew everything from the beginning, she said, and he chose to disappear, so my mom and I could live a normal life. He didn't just know, Cole replied. He left a trail, right where it needed to be. He pointed to Ranger. Elena, do you know why Ranger led me to Lucas's old room? It wasn't instinct. It was training. Training? She asked, confused. Cole opened the drawer and pulled out Lucas's old notebook. He flipped to the final page, then pointed at a small symbol tucked in the corner, 3 interlocking circles with a dog's head at the center. That's a navigation mark, Cole explained. Lucas was part of an advanced canine coordination unit, authorized to train service dogs using personalized codes. He could train Ranger to remember scents, responses, and destinations. He sent this dog in his place, Elena whispered. Not sent, Cole corrected. Entrusted. As Cole turned to make coffee, Ranger stood, slowly walking over to Elena. She knelt, eyes meeting his. No fear, no hesitation. You were with my father, weren't you? She asked softly. Ranger stepped closer and gently placed his muzzle on her stomach, where a new life was growing, day by day. It wasn't fear, it was realization, that Ranger didn't just remember her father. He was protecting what was left of him. We've got the map, we've got the data, Cole called from the small kitchen. The question is, what do we do with it? Elena wiped her eyes. You were a soldier, you already know the answer. Cole turned back toward her. I used to serve orders. But this time, I'm serving the truth. He pulled a pistol from the drawer, old but never once off target. Ranger rested his muzzle on Elena's leg one last time, then looked to Cole, eyes sharp, as if to say, not this time, I won't lose anyone this time. Elena was tired, not the kind of tired that sleep could fix, but the exhaustion that comes from standing between two worlds, one made of truth, the other of secrets never meant to be opened. After nearly a full day traveling from the cabin to the small town of Wayford, a place with a quiet medical station, safe and out of sight, Cole let her rest for a few hours. Ranger lay by the door, his eyes never leaving her, not even for a second. You don't have to stay on high alert like that, Elena whispered, gently running her hand over his head. I'm okay. Ranger exhaled softly, a low, steady breath, as if he already knew. This wasn't the beginning. Not yet. Outside the clinic, rain tapped lightly on the roof. Cole stood next to a cheap coffee machine, paper cup in hand, but his eyes stayed locked on the phone screen, monitoring the live feed of their perimeter. He'd sent a scan of Lucas's notebook to an old friend, someone who used to work in intel analysis, hoping to confirm whether Sandvale had ever existed. The reply came 30 minutes later. No op with that exact code name, but there was a shadow unit with a similar designation. They didn't gather intel, they retrieved it, and they had clearance to eliminate any leak targets, without question. Cole stared at the message. Then, without hesitation, he reached for his gun and tucked it into the back of his waistband. Because the so-called leak target was in the next room, pregnant, and completely unaware that she'd just been marked. At exactly 11:17 a.m., 3 people walked into the clinic. Nurse scrubs, all the right paperwork, and a white medical gurney, covered by a privacy curtain. Cole stood behind the counter, eyes flicking to the security feed. No alerts, no transfer requests, and that was the first red flag. The man in front, tall, tan-skinned, military buzz cut, flashed a casual smile when he saw Cole. Morning, we're from Frontline Medical Response. Got a dispatch from the Rock Hill Auxiliary, says there's a patient here needs urgent transfer. Cole didn't respond right away. Patient name? Reigns, Elena Reigns. Ranger, who had been lying down, suddenly snapped to his feet. No bark, no growl, but his body coiled, tight with instinct, eyes sharp as blades. Where's the transfer order? Cole asked flat. The lead man squinted. And you are? Level 3 security. Where's your paperwork? That's when Ranger barked, loud, piercing, not a warning, a target lock. Then he lunged, straight at the gurney. It all happened in less than 3 seconds. One of the so-called medics pulled out a syringe, the kind no clinic would ever use for treatment. Cole drew his gun. Hands down. Now. Ranger shoved the gurney hard, knocking it sideways, revealing what was underneath. Soft restraints, a blindfold, and an unused IV drip. Not a single piece of medical equipment in sight. "You're not medics," Cole growled. "Drop your weapons." But they weren't here to talk. The tallest man pulled a device, looked like a pen, but with a red button at the top. Before he could press it, Cole fired. The bullet slammed into his shoulder, sending him sprawling. The device clattered to the ground. Ranger lunged at the second man, slamming him into the floor, using his full weight to pin him down. A scream, glass shattering. A second gunshot ripped through the thin clinic wall. Cole spun around. Elena stood in the doorway, hand over her belly, face pale as chalk. "Run, Elena," Cole shouted. "Back door. Now." She nodded. No questions, no hesitation. Ranger instantly pulled off the restrained man and bolted after Elena. Cole fired once more. A clean shot to the leg of the third man just as he tried to stand. Then tore down the back hallway. The clinic's rear door slammed open. Ranger led. Elena followed, breath ragged. Cole covered the rear. Their truck sat 20 meters away. No time to think. Cole unlocked it on the fly, shoved Elena into the passenger seat. Ranger leapt into the back seat like he'd done it 1,000 times. The engine roared to life, and the truck peeled off, tires skidding across wet asphalt. 15 minutes later, they pulled into a clearing in the woods. Far from the town center, deep in the quiet, Elena sat hunched forward, breathing hard, face flushed with fear. "Who were they?" she asked. "How did they even know I was there?" Cole took a deep breath. "They weren't tracking you. They were tracking Ranger. And wherever Ranger shows up, they assume your father left something behind. So if I go anywhere, they'll find you." Elena turned to look at Ranger, who now stood just outside the truck, still on alert, back straight, ears sharp. "Then he's not just protecting me," she said softly. "He's warning me, with everything he knows how to do." Cole nodded. "And if he hadn't barked exactly when he did, I think we'd have lost you tonight." As they pulled away, Elena glanced back through the rearview mirror. The small clinic blurred behind the rain. But inside her, her father's voice echoed clearer than ever. "If they come before you understand why, don't run alone. Let Ranger choose the way." And tonight, it was that very dog who led her out of a hunt she never even knew had begun. Near midnight, in a small wooden cabin tucked deep in the woods, the rain still hadn't stopped. Cole sat near the window, gun at his side, eyes scanning every movement outside. Elena was different, curled in the corner, both hands over her stomach, staring at the floor like she was anchoring herself against 100 thoughts screaming through her mind. Ranger lay at her feet, breathing steady. But not like usual. This time, he faced her directly, eyes half open, watching her every breath like a sentry who understood that tonight's silence wasn't ordinary. Elena hadn't told Cole, not yet, but ever since hearing her father's tape, something inside her had begun to shift. At first, it was just the dreams, short, fragmented, disconnected. A desert camp, a siren wailing in the night, and a name shouted through wind. "Echo 9, hold your position." But the dreams didn't stop when she woke up. Earlier that afternoon, as Elena stepped out of the truck at an empty gas station, she knew exactly where the security camera was. She knew its field of view and how to stand so it wouldn't catch her face. She'd never been trained, never served, and yet she knew. And tonight, while Cole was checking the map under the dim cabin light, she suddenly said, "If someone's tailing us, they won't take the main road. They'll use the back route to the north, old wooden bridge across the dry riverbed." Cole spun around. "What did you just say?" Elena paused, confused. She didn't know why she said it, but she knew she was right. She scooted closer to Ranger, gently ran her hand along his ear, and for the first time, he tilted his head up to look at her the same way he once looked at Lucas. Not just obedience, recognition. "You remember my father," Elena whispered. "And now, you're seeing part of him in me, aren't you?" Ranger didn't bark, didn't move. But the way he looked at her, so deep, so aware, it was almost human. Elena closed her eyes, and in that darkness she heard voices, not clear, not direct, but echoing through memories that weren't hers. "If we lose contact, don't try to radio back, just pull out. Don't let the data fall into their hands. Ranger, stay low. On my left. Lena, I'm sorry if I don't make it back." Her eyes flew open. She blinked hard, breathing fast. Cole stepped in, alarmed. "Elena, what's going on?" She looked at him, like she'd just returned from someplace else. I think I just heard my father," she whispered. Not a dream, his voice giving orders, battlefield commands. Cole didn't speak. He didn't have to. He'd seen enough to know this wasn't just grief or exhaustion. It wasn't a dream, she said again, softer now. It felt like, but not mine. Cole nodded slowly, his voice careful. Could be parasitic data. Some experiments suggest DNA can retain fragments of electromagnetic patterns, especially if there was exposure to cognitive encoding. Elena stared at him. You're saying I'm carrying that data? Not just in my mind, but in my blood? And if Lucas recorded that tape using neural encoding, Cole added, and your mother interacted with it while pregnant with you. He paused. Then maybe part of his neural map imprinted onto you. Isn't that just a sci-fi theory? She scoffed, her voice tinged with bitterness. Cole shrugged. I once saw a soldier wake up in the middle of the night and draw a perfect layout of an enemy base after a week of hypnotherapy. In war, impossible is just a polite way of saying unproven. At that moment, Ranger stood up. He paced once around Elena, then sat right beside her, facing the door, exactly like the stance Lucas had trained into him years ago. Elena turned to Cole. You see that? Ever since the clinic, Ranger hasn't waited for your commands anymore. Cole looked at the dog, then slowly nodded. It's not because he's disobeying me. It's because he's found the person he's supposed to follow. Elena, Cole lowered his voice, I don't think your father just left instructions. I think he left a part of himself in you, and Ranger somehow can feel it. She placed her hand over her chest. Her heartbeat was steady. But in her mind, the image grew sharper. Lucas kneeling beside Ranger, gently stroking his fur, tying a small pouch to his collar, his eyes firm as he said, Go, old friend, deliver it to the one who's worthy. She had never lived that memory, but she knew it was real. They won't stop, Cole said. Not now, not when they know you're starting to remember. They can't take what my father left behind, Elena replied, her voice eerily calm. Why not? Cole asked. She looked at Ranger, then rested her hand on her belly. Because it's alive, and this time, it knows how to fight back. After that night, Elena stopped dreaming. The images, the memories, her father's voice, they no longer came to her in sleep. They stayed, sharp, conscious, like a part of her had just been unlocked. The next morning, as they packed up to leave the cabin, Elena opened her personal bag. Inside, the chain with the silver dog tag still lay quietly, colder and heavier than usual. She placed it on the table, about to toss it into her bag when Cole stopped her. Wait, he said, frowning. Let me see that. He picked it up, tilting it back and forth under the slanted morning sunlight streaming through the cabin's wooden window. A small scratch along the tag's edge caught the light in a strange way, too precise to be natural, not worn by time. This isn't just for remembrance, Cole murmured. He pulled a small knife from his jacket pocket and carefully slipped the blade into the seam. There was a faint click. The tag's surface flipped open like a razor-thin lid. Inside was a black USB drive, so small it could have been missed entirely unless someone was truly looking. Ranger, who had been lying by Elena's feet, sprang up the moment Cole slipped the knife into the tag's edge. A faint click echoed, just enough to break the silence, as the face of the tag lifted like a thin lid. Elena stared at it, unable to speak. Even without touching it, she knew. This was the reason her father was never allowed to come back. A few minutes later, Cole opened his old-school laptop, the kind that never touches the internet. He plugged in the USB, his fingers moving slowly, like he was opening a casket filled with memories long buried. The screen lit up. One folder appeared. Its name, A Light Never Meant to Shine. Inside were hundreds of files, videos, reports, satellite images, internal audio logs. Each one was a shard of the truth. Illegal biomedical experiments on civilians, records of controlled targets, and detailed breakdowns of a covert genetic human enhancement program called Everlight, a project deemed a failure, yet clearly leaving effects that reached into the next generation. Elena didn't read every file. She just saw the names, the images, the reports, one of which confirmed her mother had been on the list. And she, Elena herself, was the unrecorded consequence no one ever planned to account for. Outside, the sky was growing lighter. Cole poured a mug of cold coffee, silent. Elena sat still. Ranger rested his head on her leg, eyes half shut, as if he understood this choice was bigger than any mission he'd ever carried out. You could stay quiet, Cole said finally. No one knows you have this USB. No one knows you're still alive. But you know, Elena said softly. I do. Cole nodded. And I'll protect you, no matter what you choose. Elena looked down at Ranger. What about him? Ranger opened his eyes. No bark, no whine. Just a long, steady gaze. As if he understood, this was the final reason Lucas had left him behind. That afternoon, in a small coffee shop with no security cameras, Elena met with a veteran investigative journalist, someone once blacklisted by the government for digging too deep. She handed him the USB without a name or return address. Only said, I don't need credit, I just need the truth, not to die. As she left, Ranger turned and looked at the man, a brief glance, but one that made him freeze mid-step. 2 weeks later, headlines across the country exploded. Names, reports, faces once buried in silence, now everywhere. No one ever came forward, no name, no sender. But a part of Lucas Brandt's story was finally told. This time, not through a weapon, but through the choice of a daughter he never got to hold. On a small hill outside Colorado, Elena sat on an old wooden bench, fingers brushing the silver chain engraved with the initials LB. Ranger lay beside her, head resting gently on her leg, almost identical to a photo in the weathered notebook Lucas had left behind. We didn't win a war, she said softly, as if speaking to her father, though he was long gone. But at least we didn't let it be forgotten. Ranger lifted his head. A light breeze passed through. And for a moment, Elena felt someone was standing behind her, smiling. Not goodbye, but congratulations. There are stories that aren't told in words. They live in memories, in scars, and sometimes in the eyes of a loyal dog who never forgot his mission. Lucas Brandt didn't live to speak the truth, but his daughter did. And thanks to Ranger, the silent witness to a buried war, the truth finally found its way home. If this story moved you, even just a little, hit subscribe to Dog Stories so you won't miss the next heartfelt journey. Because here, we don't just tell stories about dogs. We tell stories about loyalty, love, and the powerful lessons only a dog can teach a human. What about you? If it were you, would you risk everything, like Elena did, to share a truth your father once gave his life to protect? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And remember, not all heroes carry guns. Some heroes just stay by your side, quietly, faithfully, until the day the story is finally told. Thank you for staying with us until the very end.